I'm Morgan Hayes, 34, and despite climbing the corporate ladder to become marketing executive at one of Boston's top firms, I've never felt good enough for my parents. So when Mom called last week saying, "Come early Saturday, we want to celebrate you and your promotion," I felt a surge of hope. Finally, the validation I'd been seeking for years. I spent hours selecting the perfect outfit and gifts, rehearsing what I'd say. As I pulled into their driveway noticing extra cars, a strange feeling washed over me. Something wasn't right. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're from. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear stories that might make you feel less alone in your family struggles. Growing up as the oldest child in the Hayes family, my childhood wasn't terrible, but it wasn't the nurturing environment kids deserve. My parents, Elizabeth and Thomas Hayes, had always set the bar impossibly high. Nothing short of perfection was acceptable in our household. My report cards with all as would be met with, "What happened to the A+ you got last semester in math?" While other parents celebrated their children's efforts, mine focused on the gap between my achievements and perfection. My decision to pursue marketing instead of law or medicine was met with thinly veiled disappointment. "Marketing is fine if you want something creative," my father had said, making creative sound like a terminal illness. Even as I worked my way up from entry-level to management positions, each promotion was acknowledged with qualified praise. "That's nice, but Sarah Wilson's daughter just made partner at her law firm," or "the Johnson's son opened his own medical practice." Family gatherings became battlegrounds where my accomplishments were either ignored or diminished. Last Thanksgiving, I mentioned securing a major client that increased our company revenue by 30%. My announcement was met with polite nods before the conversation quickly shifted to my cousin Rachel's job at a prestigious accounting firm. "Now that's a stable career," my father had commented, looking pointedly at me. The pattern was consistent and painful. When I bought my first condo, my parents wondered why I hadn't waited to afford something in a better neighborhood. When I was featured in Marketing Monthly as one of 30 under 30 to watch, they asked why I wasn't on the cover. It seemed nothing I did could ever fill the mysterious void of their expectations. 3 weeks ago, I received the news that I had been promoted to Executive Marketing Director, becoming the youngest person to hold this position in my company's history. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, a corner office, and a team of 15 people reporting directly to me. I was ecstatic and called my parents immediately, leaving a voicemail when they didn't answer. 3 days passed with no response. I tried again, texting this time. My mother replied with a brief "Congratulations. Call when you can." That's why their call last week had caught me completely off guard. My mother sounded genuinely excited on the phone. "Morgan, we heard about your promotion. Come early on Saturday around 3. We want to celebrate you properly. Dad's grilling your favorite steaks." The invitation was so unexpected that I found myself speechless before stammering my acceptance. The days leading up to Saturday were filled with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Could this be the turning point in our relationship? Had they finally recognized my worth? I spent hours selecting the perfect outfit, a navy blue dress that was professional yet festive, paired with the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me before she passed. I bought an expensive bottle of my father's favorite whiskey and a silk scarf I knew my mother had been eyeing at Nordstrom. I even prepared what I would say when they congratulated me, practicing an acceptance speech that was gracious without sounding desperate for their approval. I wanted to appear successful and confident, the adult who no longer needed parental validation, while secretly hoping this would be the moment I finally received it. The drive to their suburban home took just over an hour, giving me plenty of time to reminisce about my childhood in that house. Despite the emotional complexity of my relationship with my parents, the physical space held many good memories: building forts in the living room, swimming in the backyard pool during summer, the comfort of my childhood bedroom that remained largely unchanged. Last year on my birthday, they had forgotten entirely. I received a text message 3 days later with a generic "Happy belated birthday" and an Amazon gift card. The hurt had been profound but familiar. This celebration seemed like an olive branch, a chance to heal old wounds and establish a more mature, respectful relationship. As I drove, I allowed myself to imagine the scenario, my parents greeting me with genuine smiles, perhaps a congratulations banner hung across the dining room, my favorite meal prepared with care, meaningful conversation about my career and life. It was a beautiful fantasy, one I desperately wanted to believe could become reality. The neighborhood looked the same as always, manicured lawns, luxury sedans and driveways, the quiet affluence that had shaped my understanding of success. I checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror before gathering the gift bags from the passenger seat. The extra cars in the driveway gave me pause. Had they invited others to celebrate with us? The thought was both touching and anxiety-inducing. Public recognition from my parents would be unprecedented. With a deep breath to steady myself, I walked up the familiar path to the front door, gifts in hand and hope in my heart. After all these years, maybe things were finally about to change. The red brick colonial I'd grown up in looked exactly as it always had, immaculate landscaping, brass knocker gleaming in the afternoon sun, American flag fluttering gently from the porch column. I shifted the gift bags to my left hand and pressed the doorbell, hearing the familiar Westminster chimes echo inside. After waiting nearly a minute with no response, I tried again. The sound of laughter filtered through the windows, but no one came to the door. After the third attempt, I set down the bags and fished out my keychain. I still had a key to my parents' house, though I rarely used it. They must not hear the bell over the conversation, I muttered to myself, unlocking the door and gathering my gifts. The entryway smelled of my mother's signature potpourri and something delicious baking in the oven, cinnamon and vanilla, probably her famous apple cake. More laughter erupted from the direction of the living room, along with the clink of glasses and the low murmur of multiple conversations. "Hello," I called out, setting the gifts on the console table. "Mom? Dad? I'm here." The voices continued uninterrupted. I slipped off my heels, a lifelong rule in the Hayes household, and made my way toward the living room. As I rounded the corner, I froze at the threshold, trying to process the scene before me. Our extended family filled the living room, aunts, uncles, cousins, even my grandparents who rarely left their retirement community in Florida. A congratulations banner hung across the fireplace mantel, and champagne flutes glinted in nearly everyone's hands. In the center of it all stood my cousin Rachel, beaming as my father clapped a hand on her shoulder. To Rachel, my father was saying, raising his glass, the newest partner at Wilson, Clark and Associates. "You've made us all proud." The room erupted in cheers and applause. No one had noticed me standing there, stunned into silence, still holding my purse with white-knuckled fingers. It was my mother who spotted me first. Her eyes widened slightly, champagne glass halting midway to her lips. "Morgan, you're early." The room fell silent as every head turned in my direction. I felt heat rising to my cheeks as I forced a smile. "Mom, you said to come at 3. It's 3:15. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears, too high, too tight. Rachel stepped forward, looking genuinely confused. "Morgan, I didn't know you were coming today." My father cleared his throat. "Your mother must have mixed up the dates. We're celebrating Rachel's partnership today. Weren't we planning your thing for next weekend, Elizabeth?" My mother's expression flickered between embarrassment and something else, annoyance. Oh dear, what a mix-up. I could have sworn we said next Saturday for Morgan's promotion. She stumbled slightly over the word promotion, as if she couldn't quite remember what it was we were supposed to be celebrating. Marketing director, I supplied automatically, the title I'd worked 10 years to achieve, feeling suddenly small and insignificant in the face of Rachel's partnership. An awkward silence descended on the room. My Aunt Patricia broke it with forced cheerfulness. "Well, this is wonderful. Now we can celebrate both of our successful girls today." My grandfather, never one for social niceties, grunted, "What exactly is a marketing director anyway? You make commercials or something?" Before I could answer, my mother interjected, "Morgan, since you're here, would you mind grabbing another bottle of champagne from the garage fridge? We seem to be running low." As I turned to leave the room, I heard my father's voice resume, as I was saying about Rachel's achievement. In the quiet of the garage, I leaned against the refrigerator and closed my eyes. The cold metal against my forehead provided a momentary anchor as my mind raced to catch up with reality. There was no celebration planned for me. The invitation had been a mistake, or worse, an afterthought so insignificant they'd forgotten about it entirely. I grabbed the champagne and took a moment to compose myself. I was a professional accustomed to navigating awkward business situations with grace. I could handle a family gathering with the same poise. Taking a deep breath, I returned to the living room, where conversations had resumed as if I'd never interrupted. Rachel was now seated in the center of the sofa, surrounded by admirers as she detailed her first major case as partner. My mother took the champagne from me with a distracted "thank you" before turning back to the group. "Did you know Rachel will be handling the Jensen corporate merger?" "It's been all over the business section," my Aunt Patricia announced loudly. "That's wonderful," I said, finding a place to perch on the arm of a chair at the periphery of the gathering. "I actually worked with Jensen on their rebranding last year before the merger talks began." My comment hung in the air briefly before my Uncle Dave responded, "So Rachel, will you be relocating to the New York office?" As the conversation flowed around me, I became increasingly aware of my invisibility. Family members who had walked past me without acknowledgement eagerly approached Rachel with congratulations and questions. My father beamed with pride every time someone mentioned her accomplishment, while my mother fluttered around refilling drinks and directing compliments Rachel's way. "Morgan," my mother eventually said, touching my arm, "would you mind helping me in the kitchen? These appetizers won't serve themselves." In the kitchen, I mechanically arranged cheese and crackers on trays while my mother fussed with the oven timer. "I really am sorry about the mix-up," she said, not looking at me. "You know how busy things get. We can certainly do something for your promotion next weekend." "It's fine," I replied automatically. "It's not a big deal." "That's the spirit," she said, patting my arm. "It's not like it's a partnership at a law firm, after all. Though I've always said you could have gone to law school if you'd applied yourself more in college." The familiar sting of her words was no less painful for being expected. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see my father presenting Rachel with a small box wrapped in silver paper. Her delighted gasp carried clearly as she opened it to reveal what appeared to be an antique watch. "Your grandfather's pocket watch," my father said warmly. "For someone who values tradition and family as much as you do." I nearly dropped the tray I was holding. That watch, my great-grandfather's gold pocket watch, had been promised to me since childhood. "When you achieve something truly significant," my father had always said. The implication now was clear: my achievement wasn't significant enough. As I carried the appetizer tray back to the living room, Rachel caught my eye and offered a sympathetic smile that somehow made everything worse. I didn't want her pity. I wanted my parents to see me really see me and what I had accomplished. "Morgan, there you are." My Aunt Patricia's voice carried across the room as I set down the tray of appetizers. "Come join us." Rachel was just telling us about her corner office overlooking Central Park. I plastered on my best client meeting smile and took the only available seat, a footstool at the edge of the conversation circle. Rachel, ensconced in my father's leather armchair, his chair, where no one was allowed to sit, continued her story about the perks of partnership. "The partners' dining room is incredible," she gushed. "All mahogany and old-world charm. They even have a chef who trained in Paris." "Just like you wanted to do, Morgan," my mother interjected, appearing beside me with a glass of white wine. "Remember that phase when you wanted to attend culinary school?" "It wasn't a phase, Mom," I corrected quietly. "I was considering it as a double major with marketing." "Well, thank goodness you didn't pursue that," she laughed, addressing the room rather than me. "Can you imagine? All that education for cooking." Several relatives chuckled indulgently while I sipped my wine, recalling how I'd abandoned my culinary aspirations after similar dismissive comments had worn me down. Meanwhile, Rachel had received family support when she decided to spend a year backpacking through Europe before law school, a necessary life experience, according to my parents. The afternoon progressed painfully. Each family member seemed determined to highlight Rachel's accomplishments while inadvertently diminishing mine. Uncle Dave asked if my little marketing job offered retirement benefits. Aunt Patricia wondered aloud if I'd ever consider a real career like Rachel's. Even my grandmother, usually my ally, remarked that it wasn't too late to get a law degree. When I mentioned securing the Hartman account, a Fortune 500 company that had boosted our agency's revenue by millions, my comment was met with polite nods before my father steered the conversation back to Rachel's recent victory in court. "That's the kind of strategic thinking that sets someone apart," he said proudly. "Not just creativity, but real analytical skills." The implication that my work lacked analytical rigor stung particularly, considering the data-driven campaigns I'd become known for in the industry. Midway through the gathering, my mother enlisted me to help serve food while Rachel remained seated, guests bringing her plates and refreshing her drinks. From the kitchen, I watched as my father presented her with a leather-bound book. "What's that?" I asked when I returned with another tray. "Just Dad's old copy of Principles of Law," Rachel replied. "He thought it might be meaningful now that I'm partner." I swallowed hard, remembering how I'd asked to borrow that book for a business ethics course in college. My father had refused, saying it was too valuable to leave the house. The real blow came when my mother brought out the cake. Her special 3-layer caramel apple spice cake with cream cheese frosting. My birthday cake request every year, denied because it was too complicated or not everyone likes apple cake. Yet here it was, with "Congratulations, Rachel" written in perfect script across the top. "Your favorite," my mother exclaimed to Rachel, who looked genuinely surprised. "I thought this was Morgan's favorite," she said, glancing at me. "Oh, you both loved it as children," my mother replied dismissively. "Morgan, would you cut the pieces? You know how I never get them even." As I sliced my dream cake for someone else's celebration, I heard my father make the announcement that would finally break me. "Elizabeth and I have another surprise," he said, his voice carrying that special tone reserved for truly significant news. "In honor of Rachel's partnership and her dedication to family, we've started a college fund for little Emma. We're seeding it with $25,000. Emma was Rachel's 2-year-old daughter. The same father who had told me that money doesn't grow on trees when I'd asked for help with graduate school tuition was now publicly gifting a substantial sum to my cousin's child. "That's incredibly generous," Rachel said, looking genuinely moved. "Emma will be so grateful when she's older." "Family supports family," my father replied, with a pointed look that seemed directed at me. "When there's a commitment to certain values and traditions." The implication couldn't have been clearer. My childless, unmarried state and non-traditional career path meant I stood outside those values. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I finally allowed the tears to fall. 10 minutes later, having repaired my makeup and composed myself, I returned to find everyone moving to the dining room for dinner. The seating arrangement placed me between my grandfather, who was hard of hearing, and my 7-year-old second cousin who spent the entire meal playing a game on his mother's phone. Rachel sat at the head of the table beside my father, the position of honor. As the plates were cleared, my father stood for another toast. "To success that comes from hard work, commitment, and the right choices," he said, raising his glass toward Rachel. "Some paths lead to real achievement, while others." His eyes drifted briefly toward me before returning to Rachel. "Well, we're here to celebrate the path done right," my mother added as an apparent afterthought, and, of course, Morgan's promotion to marketing manager. "Director," I corrected quietly. "Executive marketing director." "Yes, that," she smiled vaguely. "It's nice to have both girls doing well in their own ways." Aunt Patricia leaned over. "When are you going to settle down like Rachel, dear? 34 is getting up there, you know." Rachel had Emma at 29, perfect timing. As the dessert plates were distributed, I caught Rachel looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Not quite pity, not quite guilt, but something uncomfortable nonetheless. It only made the humiliation more complete. The family heirloom watch gleamed on her wrist as she accepted her piece of my favorite cake, served on my grandmother's best china that was brought out only for the most special occasions. Occasions that, apparently, didn't include any of my achievements. The dining room had always been the heart of the Hayes family power structure. With its mahogany table, ancestral portraits, and strict seating hierarchy, it was where family verdicts were delivered and comparisons were drawn. Tonight was no exception as crystal glasses clinked and silverware scraped against my mother's best china. "Rachel," my father said, refilling her wine glass before bypassing mine completely, "tell everyone about the Jensen merger. It's fascinating how much responsibility the firm has entrusted to you already." Rachel launched into an explanation of corporate law that had my father nodding appreciatively with each technical term she used. The rest of the family leaned forward, entranced, while I pushed caramel apple cake around my plate, no longer able to enjoy even this small pleasure. "It's really about understanding how to leverage assets while minimizing liability," Rachel concluded. "The creative accounting is where the real strategy comes in." "Now that's real business," my father said emphatically. "Not just making things look pretty or writing catchy jingles." I set my fork down with more force than intended, causing several heads to turn my way. "Marketing is substantially more than that, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "My team develops comprehensive brand strategies based on extensive market research and data analytics." "Of course, dear," my mother interjected. "Your little promotions and social media posts are very creative." "I manage a department of 15 people and a multi-million-dollar budget," I clarified, feeling my professional accomplishments shrinking with each dismissive comment. Uncle Dave chuckled. "But it's not exactly like winning cases in court, is it? Rachel's work affects major corporations and the economy." "The Hartman campaign I directed increased their quarterly revenue by 37%, I countered. That translated to over $50 million in growth and hundreds of jobs." A brief, uncomfortable silence followed before my father cleared his throat. "Speaking of real impact, Rachel, tell them about the pro bono work your firm does." As Rachel described her firm's charitable initiatives, I noticed my mother slipping away to the living room. She returned moments later carrying a small velvet box. "We have one more surprise," she announced, interrupting Rachel mid-sentence. This seemed like the perfect occasion. My heart sank as she placed the box in Rachel's hands. I recognized it immediately, the distinctive navy velvet case that had housed my grandmother's sapphire necklace. The necklace my parents had explicitly promised would be mine on a significant achievement. "We always said this should go to someone who would wear it proudly at important firm events," my mother explained as Rachel gasped at the brilliant blue stones. "Someone who would represent the family with the proper stature." The memory surfaced with painful clarity, my 16th birthday, admiring the necklace as my mother stored it away. "This will be yours one day, Morgan, when you've accomplished something truly worthy of the Hayes name." Rachel seemed genuinely uncomfortable now. "Aunt Elizabeth, isn't this the necklace you always said was for Morgan?" An awkward silence fell over the table. My mother's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, we thought it suited your achievement and position," she replied smoothly. "Morgan's work doesn't exactly provide the same formal occasions for such a piece." Something inside me finally snapped. The decades of diminishment, the constant comparisons, the moving goalposts of what constituted achievement worth recognizing, it all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. "Excuse me," I said quietly, standing up. "Mom, Dad, could I speak with you in the kitchen for a moment?" My parents exchanged a look of mild annoyance at the interruption before reluctantly following me. Once in the kitchen, I closed the door and turned to face them. "What's going on here?" I asked directly. "You invited me for a celebration of my promotion, but clearly that was never the plan." My mother busied herself with rearranging dessert plates. "It was just a mix-up with dates, Morgan. Don't be so sensitive." "A mix-up that resulted in you giving Rachel the necklace you promised me? A mix-up that has you celebrating her with my favorite cake that you've refused to make for my birthdays? A mix-up that includes giving her Emma a college fund when you told me I needed to learn financial independence by taking out student loans?" My father's expression hardened. "Now listen here. There's no need for this drama. Rachel has achieved something significant, partnership at a prestigious firm. That deserves recognition. And my achievement doesn't?" I countered, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Executive Marketing Director at 34. The youngest in company history." "It's marketing, Morgan," my father said dismissively, playing with words and pictures. "Rachel is doing real work with real impact." "Thomas," my mother cautioned, glancing toward the dining room door. No, Elizabeth, she needs to hear this, my father continued. We had such hopes for you, Morgan. You could have been anything, doctor, lawyer, even an engineer with your math scores. Instead, you chose the easy path. Easy? I repeated incredulously. I work 60-hour weeks. I've built campaigns that have revitalized failing businesses and created jobs. There was nothing easy about climbing the corporate ladder as a woman in a male-dominated agency. That's not what we mean, my mother said, her voice taking on the patronizing tone I'd heard throughout my childhood. You've always chosen the path of least resistance. Rachel pushed herself through law school while raising Emma as a single mother. She made sacrifices. And I haven't? I asked, feeling tears threatening at the corners of my eyes. Look, my father said, his tone softening slightly in a way that somehow felt worse than his anger. We're proud that you've done well in your field. But this celebration tonight, this was meant to show you what real success looks like. The kind of achievement we've always hoped you'd aspire to. The words hit like a physical blow. This hadn't been a mistake. They had deliberately invited me to witness Rachel's celebration, not to share in it, but to be taught a lesson in what they considered real accomplishment. So this was what? An object lesson? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Bring Morgan to show her what she should have been? My mother at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. We thought seeing Rachel's success might inspire you to reconsider your choices. It's not too late for law school, you know. I stared at them both, these people who had shaped my understanding of love and worth, who had consistently moved the finish line each time I approached it. For the first time, I saw them clearly, not as the infallible authorities of my childhood, but as deeply flawed individuals projecting their own insecurities and unfulfilled ambitions onto their daughter. Excuse me, I said, turning toward the powder room off the kitchen. I need a moment. In the small bathroom, I gripped the edges of the sink and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me had achieved everything she'd set out to accomplish professionally, had built a life she was proud of, had overcome countless obstacles, many created by the very people who should have been her strongest supporters. As tears slid down my cheeks, a strange calm began to settle over me. This moment of clarity wasn't just painful, it was liberating. For years, I had been chasing approval I would never receive, trying to fill a void that could never be filled because the specifications kept changing. I splashed cold water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and made a decision. I could leave now, retreat wounded as I had so many times before. Or I could finally stand up for myself and the life I had built. The choice was suddenly, blindingly clear. When I emerged from the bathroom, I found the family had migrated back to the living room. Coffee and after-dinner drinks were being served while Rachel continued to hold court, the sapphire necklace now gleaming at her throat. My mother shot me a warning look as I entered, clearly hoping I would maintain the polite facade that had characterized our family dynamics for decades. Instead, I walked to the center of the room and gently clinked my spoon against my coffee cup. The conversations gradually quieted as all eyes turned to me. I'd like to say something, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. First, Rachel, genuine congratulations on your partnership. It's a tremendous achievement, and you've worked incredibly hard for it. Rachel's smile was cautious, but genuine. Thank you, Morgan. I also want to thank everyone for being here today, I continued. It's given me an opportunity to see something very clearly that I've been struggling to understand for most of my adult life. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Morgan, perhaps this isn't the time. Actually, Dad, it's exactly the time, I replied firmly. For as long as I can remember, I've been trying to earn your approval and recognition. Every achievement, every promotion, every milestone has been pursued with the hope that maybe this time, it would be enough. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. My mother's face had paled slightly, while my father's jaw was set in a rigid line. What I've realized today is that it was never about my achievements at all. No accomplishment of mine would ever be sufficient because you decided long ago what success should look like, and my choices didn't fit that mold. That's not true, my mother protested weakly. We've always supported you. Have you? I asked, meeting her gaze directly. When have you ever celebrated my achievements without comparison or qualification? When have you ever acknowledged my career without suggesting alternatives that would better meet your expectations? Before she could respond, I continued. Today wasn't a mix-up. You deliberately invited me to Rachel's celebration, not to include me, but to show me what you consider real success. To remind me how I've disappointed you. Now that's going too far, my father interjected, rising from his chair. You're making a scene over nothing. It's not nothing to me, I replied, my voice breaking slightly before I steadied it again. It's 34 years of never being quite good enough, of watching every achievement I've worked for be dismissed or diminished. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Several relatives studied their coffee cups intently, while others exchanged awkward glances. It was Rachel who finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. She's right, Uncle Thomas. All heads turned to her in surprise. Morgan's right, she repeated more firmly. For as long as I can remember, you and Aunt Elizabeth have pitted us against each other. Every family gathering, every holiday, every phone call somehow included a comparison. Why can't you be more driven like Morgan? Morgan's already finished college, Rachel. What's taking you so long? I stared at her in disbelief. They did that to you too? Rachel nodded, removing the sapphire necklace and setting it carefully on the coffee table. Different standards, same technique. When I struggled in undergrad, they'd mention how easily academics came to you. When I got divorced, your mother called to tell me how disappointing it was that I couldn't maintain a marriage like Morgan would have. But Morgan's never been married, my cousin Jamie pointed out, looking confused. Exactly, Rachel said. It wasn't about reality, it was about using each of us as a theoretical standard to make the other feel inadequate. My mother stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We've only ever wanted the best for both of you girls. The best according to whom? I asked quietly. Because from where I stand, it looks like you've spent years ensuring neither of us would ever feel quite good enough, using each of us as a weapon against the other. How dare you speak to your mother that way, my father growled. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for Morgan recently, Thomas? My grandmother's voice, rarely raised, cut through the tension. From what I've observed today, you've done nothing but undermine and dismiss her. My father looked stunned at being challenged by his own mother. The sapphire necklace was meant for Morgan, my grandmother continued. You told me yourself when she graduated college. Just as the watch was promised to her since she was a child. Plans change, my mother said stiffly. You felt Morgan didn't deserve them, my grandmother finished for her. Because she chose a different path than the one you prescribed. Aunt Patricia cleared her throat nervously. Perhaps we should all calm down. This is supposed to be a celebration. Yes, I agreed, finding my voice again. It is. And I think it's time I celebrated myself, since I clearly can't count on my parents to do so. I turned to Rachel. I'm truly sorry if my achievements were ever used against you. That was never my intention. Rachel stepped forward and, to my surprise, hugged me. I've always admired you, she whispered. They made it so hard for us to be allies. When we separated, she addressed the room. I think Morgan and I need to talk. Alone. Without waiting for a response, she took my hand and led me toward the front door. My mother called after us, her voice tinged with panic. Girls, don't be dramatic. Come back and we can discuss this reasonably. Rachel paused, looking back at her. I think we've had enough of your version of reasonable for one day, Aunt Elizabeth. As we stepped onto the front porch, closing the door behind us, I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in years. The porch swing creaked softly as Rachel and I sat side by side, the sounds of uncomfortable family conversations muffled behind the closed front door. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. It was Rachel who finally broke the silence. I've wanted to have this conversation with you for about 15 years, she said, a sad smile playing at her lips. I just never knew how to start it. I studied my cousin's face, the same face I'd resented in family photos, envied at gatherings, and compared myself to countless times. Now I saw something different, the same weariness, the same battle scars from years of conditional approval. I thought you were their golden child, I admitted. Perfect Rachel with her law degree and her traditional life choices. She laughed without humor. And I thought you were the favorite, brilliant Morgan who could do no wrong. Why can't you focus like your cousin Morgan? Morgan would never have gotten AC in biology. Morgan doesn't waste time on frivolous social activities. That's almost word for word what they said to me about you, I marveled. Just swap out biology for literature and social activities for creative pursuits. We sat with this revelation, the years of manufactured competition stretching between us like a tangible thing. Do you remember when we were kids? Rachel asked. Before high school? We used to be friends. I nodded, memories surfacing of summer afternoons spent building elaborate worlds for our dolls, secret codes passed in church, conspiratorial giggles at formal family dinners. What happened to us? I wondered aloud. They happened, Rachel replied simply. Aunt Elizabeth started inviting me for special lunches, where she'd subtly quiz me about my grades compared to yours. Uncle Thomas would call with career advice that always included mentions of how you were pursuing a soft career while I was making responsible choices. It was the same for me, I confirmed. Mom would casually mention how you were dating appropriate men while I was wasting time with creative types. Dad would send me articles about law careers with notes saying Rachel understands the value of stability. Rachel shook her head, absently twisting the watch on her wrist, my grandfather's watch. After a moment's hesitation, she removed it and held it out to me. This should have been yours, she said quietly. I had no idea it was promised to you. I stared at the watch but didn't take it. Keep it. It wasn't your fault. None of this was our fault, she emphasized, still holding out the watch. But we can start fixing it now. Reluctantly, I accepted the timepiece, running my thumb over the worn gold case that had counted the minutes of 3 generations of my family. The necklace, too, Rachel insisted. I'll get it before I leave. Were you really invited just for today, or did you know about this? I gestured vaguely toward the house. Rachel sighed. I was told they were celebrating my partnership. Your name wasn't mentioned until you walked in. That's when I started to piece it together. The manipulation was so calculated it took my breath away. 34 years, I murmured. 34 years of thinking I wasn't good enough. And 32 years for me, Rachel added. Different expectations, same impossible standards. We fell silent again, the weight of lost time and manufactured rivalry hanging between us. I have a proposal, Rachel said suddenly. Let's stop letting them define our relationship. Right here, right now. What do you mean? I mean, let's be cousins again. Friends, even. Let's compare notes instead of competing. Let's be the family we should have been all along. She extended her hand formally, but her eyes held a hint of the mischievous girl I'd once built sand castles with at our grandparents' beach house. I took her hand, feeling something unlock inside my chest. Deal. The front door opened, and my mother appeared, her carefully composed expression belying the tension in her shoulders. Girls, everyone's wondering where you've gone. The coffee's getting cold, and we haven't cut the second cake yet. Rachel and I exchanged glances, a lifetime of coded communication suddenly remembered and resumed. Actually, Aunt Elizabeth, Rachel said pleasantly, Morgan and I have decided to leave. My mother's composure slipped. Leave? But the celebration will continue without us, I finished, standing up. Rachel and I are going to catch up. Alone. Don't be ridiculous, my mother sputtered. Your father will be very disappointed. I'm sure he will, I replied, surprised by my own calmness. But I've spent enough time worrying about disappointing you both. We walked back into the house together, heads high as we collected our belongings. The family had reassembled in the living room, conversations halting awkwardly as we entered. Morgan and I are heading out, Rachel announced. Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us today. My father rose from his chair. Now listen here, both of you. This childish behavior is completely unacceptable. You're making a scene over nothing. It's not nothing, Dad, I replied steadily. It's our lives, our relationship, and years of manipulation. We're choosing something different now. As we gathered our purses and jackets, I noticed several of the younger cousins watching with wide eyes. My second cousin Jamie approached hesitantly. Are you really leaving? She asked, glancing nervously at my father. Yes, I answered. Sometimes you have to walk away from situations that aren't healthy. She nodded with surprising understanding. My mom does the same thing with me and my sister. Always comparing. I exchanged glances with Rachel before squeezing Jamie's shoulder. Maybe give your sister a call this week. You might be surprised at what you have in common. As we prepared to leave, my mother made one last attempt. Morgan, please be reasonable. We can discuss this like adults. We are being adults, Mom. For the first time, we're making our own choices about our relationship. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. If you walk out that door, don't expect special treatment? Rachel interrupted. Trust me, Uncle Thomas, that's the last thing either of us wants from you anymore. As we reached the door, I turned back one final time. I am Executive Marketing Director at one of the top firms in Boston. I manage 15 people and a multi-million-dollar budget. I've doubled our client roster and increased revenue by 30% in 2 years. I own my condo outright, have a healthy retirement account, and mentor young women entering the field. I'm respected by my peers and valued by my company. I took a deep breath. And none of that is diminished by the fact that it doesn't meet your expectations. For a brief moment, something like respect flickered across my father's face before his expression hardened again. You've always been too sensitive, he muttered, but the conviction in his voice had wavered. Rachel and I walked out together, closing the door firmly behind us. As we reached our cars, she turned to me with a genuine smile. Coffee next Saturday? I know a great place halfway between our apartments. I'd like that, I replied, feeling lighter than I had in years. And maybe you could bring Emma? I'd love to meet my second cousin properly. She'd like that, Rachel said. She's actually a lot like you, creative, stubborn, sees the world in her own unique way. As we embraced before parting, I realized that in losing the approval I'd never truly had, I'd gained something far more valuable, an authentic connection, and the first steps toward healing a relationship that had been poisoned by others' expectations. The drive home was quiet, but my mind was anything but silent. Decades of seeking validation, of measuring my worth against an ever-changing yardstick, of doubting my own achievements, all of it was suddenly thrown into sharp relief. The pain was still there, but alongside it was something new, clarity, and with it, the first tentative steps toward freedom. 3 months can change everything or nothing at all. In my case, it transformed my understanding of family, success, and self-worth in ways I never imagined possible. Rachel and I kept our promise to meet for coffee the following Saturday. The small cafe halfway between our apartments became our weekly ritual, neutral territory where we could unravel years of manufactured rivalry. Those first conversations were awkward, decades of conditioning difficult to overcome, but with each meeting, the artificial barriers erected between us began to crumble. I used to hate when you'd visit during college breaks, Rachel admitted during our third meeting. Aunt Elizabeth would spend weeks before your arrival commenting on how focused you were, how you never wasted time with frivolous socializing like I did. That's funny, I replied, stirring my latte, because Mom would call me at school to tell me how you were dating respectable young men from good families while I was throwing myself away on creative types with no prospects. We laughed, the absurdity of it all becoming clearer with each shared memory. By our 5th meeting, we'd progressed to bringing childhood photos and mementos, reconstructing a shared history that had been rewritten by our parents. Look at this, Rachel said one day, sliding a faded Polaroid across the table. 2 gap-toothed girls, arms around each other, stood proudly beside a lopsided sandcastle. Remember that summer at Grandma's beach house? Before they started turning us against each other. I touched the photo gently. We were so close then. We can be again, Rachel said simply. Different, but maybe better. More honest. Setting boundaries with my parents proved more challenging. The first week after the disastrous celebration, my phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls, first demanding, then pleading, then guilt-inducing. I let most go to voicemail, responding only with brief, factual messages. I'm safe. I need space. I'll contact you when I'm ready. My therapist, Dr. Levine, whom I'd started seeing 2 weeks after the incident, helped me navigate the turbulent emotions. You're grieving, she explained during our second session. Not just the relationship you had with your parents, but the one you always hoped you might have. She was right. Some days, I felt liberated, finally free from the exhausting pursuit of approval I'd never receive. Other days, I felt like a 5-year-old again, desperately wanting my parents to see me, truly see me, and be proud of who I was, not who they wanted me to be. 6 weeks after the confrontation, I received a promotion at work, Vice President of Creative Strategy, a position created specifically for me after I landed the Parker Industries account. In the past, my first call would have been to my parents, setting myself up for the inevitable disappointment of qualified praise. This time, I called Rachel. "That's incredible," she exclaimed, her enthusiasm genuine and uncomplicated. "We need to celebrate properly." The celebration dinner she organized at my favorite restaurant included friends from work, my running group, and even Emma, who presented me with a handmade card featuring a woman in a power suit surrounded by stars. No comparisons, no qualifications, no subtle undermining, just pure, uncomplicated recognition of my achievement. When Thanksgiving approached, my mother called with the usual expectation that I would attend the family gathering. For the first time in my adult life, I declined. "I'm hosting friends this year," I explained, keeping my voice neutral despite the fluttering anxiety in my stomach. "Friends," she repeated, as if the concept was foreign. "But it's a family holiday, Morgan. And I'll be spending it with people who celebrate my successes and support my choices," I replied. "That's family to me now." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations, but I didn't fill it with apologies or justifications as I once would have. Finally, my mother sighed. "Your father won't be pleased." "I know," I acknowledged. "But this is my decision." That Thanksgiving was the most relaxed I'd experienced in years. Friends crowded around my dining table, conversation flowing freely, laughter uninhibited by judgment or expectation. Rachel and Emma joined us for dessert after their obligatory appearance at the Hayes family dinner. "It was tense," Rachel reported, helping herself to pumpkin pie. "Your empty chair was practically a presence of its own." "Did they say anything?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Not directly," she replied. "But Aunt Elizabeth kept mentioning how some people prioritize friends over family these days." I smiled sadly. "They still don't get it, do they?" "Maybe they never will," Rachel said softly. "But we do, and that's what matters now." December brought an unexpected development. My mother appeared at my office unannounced, looking smaller and older than I remembered. "Can we talk?" she asked, her usual confidence noticeably absent. Over coffee in the building's atrium, she struggled to articulate what had brought her there. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," she began. He thinks you'll come around eventually. That you're being stubborn." "And what do you think, Mom?" I asked. She studied her coffee cup for a long moment. "I think we may have made mistakes." Coming from a woman who had never acknowledged error in her life, this was seismic. She didn't apologize directly. That would have been too much to expect, but she listened without interruption as I explained how their constant comparisons and moving goalposts had affected me. For perhaps the first time, she truly heard me. "I never meant to make you feel insufficient," she said finally. "We wanted to push you to be your best." "But what if my best is different from what you imagine for me?" I asked gently. She had no answer for that, but the question hung between us, a first tentative bridge across a chasm decades in the making. Christmas was a negotiated peace, lunch at my parents' house, with clear boundaries established in advance. My father remained distant, his acknowledgement of my new position limited to a gruff, "Heard about your promotion. Vice President sounds important enough." From him, it was practically effusive praise. My mother, however, surprised me with a small gift box containing my grandmother's pearl earrings, not the sapphire necklace, which had apparently been returned to my grandmother's keeping, but a peace offering nonetheless. "These should have been yours years ago," she said quietly. No conditions attached. By February, Rachel and I had established a new tradition, monthly dinners with Emma, building the relationship that should have existed all along. Emma took to calling me Aunt Morgan without prompting, delighting in having an aunt who could draw princess unicorns and build blanket forts, way higher than mommy's. She asks about you all week before our dinners, Rachel told me. It's like she's making up for lost time too. The most profound change, however, was internal. The constant voice in my head measuring my worth against impossible standards had quieted. Dr. Levine helped me recognize it when it surfaced, that internalized critical parent, and develop tools to counter it with compassion and reality-based assessment. The work you're doing is remarkable, she told me during our 6th month of therapy. Many people spend their entire lives trying to earn approval they'll never receive. I still want their approval sometimes, I admitted. Is that pathetic? It's human, she corrected gently. The goal isn't to stop wanting connection with your parents. It's to stop allowing their approval to determine your worth. In March, exactly 3 months after that fateful celebration, I hosted my own birthday party in my condo. Friends filled every corner, colleagues mingled with my running group, and Rachel and Emma arrived early to help decorate. My parents were not invited, a boundary that still felt necessary for my well-being. As I surveyed the gathering, people who valued me for exactly who I was, who celebrated my successes without qualification or comparison, I felt a profound sense of peace. The caramel apple spice cake I'd finally learned to bake myself stood proudly on the dining table, 35 candles waiting to be lit. Speech, someone called as I prepared to blow out the candles. Looking around at the faces of my chosen family, I found the words coming easily. For most of my life, I measured my worth by standards that were never truly mine. I chased approval I was never going to receive and doubted achievements that deserved celebration. But standing here today, surrounded by people who really see me, I finally understand that validation can't come from outside. It has to begin within. I raised my glass, meeting Rachel's eyes across the room. She nodded encouragingly, Emma perched on her hip. To authentic connections, to boundaries that protect our peace, and to celebrating ourselves even when others won't. Here's to 35 years of learning, and to all the years ahead lived on my own terms. The chorus of cheers and clinked glasses washed over me like a benediction. As I blew out my candles, I didn't wish for my parents' approval or understanding. Instead, I wished for the strength to continue building a life that reflected my values, surrounded by people who celebrated the real me, flaws, successes, and all. The journey wasn't over. There would be difficult conversations ahead, boundaries to maintain, old patterns to recognize and reshape. My relationship with my parents might never be what I'd once hoped for, but perhaps it could evolve into something honest, something real, something that acknowledged our differences without diminishing my worth. For now, that was enough, not a perfect happily ever after, but a genuine beginning. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who couldn't celebrate your success? How did you learn to validate yourself when others wouldn't? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' approval. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most important validation is the kind we give ourselves.